As Jack concluded his introduction, polite applause filled the town hall. Mayor Wilson beamed beside him, clearly pleased with the impressive credentials of Pine Ridge's new sheriff. Jack scanned the room, noting the mix of curious and welcoming faces, and the one exception, Evelyn Prescott, who sat frozen in her chair, her complexion alternating between ghostly white and mortified red. Before we open the floor for questions, Mayor Wilson continued, Sheriff Thornton would like to outline his priorities for community safety. Jack stepped forward again. Thank you, Mayor. Pine Ridge has always been a special place to me. My grandfather taught me to fish in Miller's Creek, and ride horses on that ranch are now restoring. I believe in community-based policing, where law enforcement and citizens work together. His gaze settled deliberately on Evelyn. I especially value observant citizens who take an active interest in their neighborhood's security. A few knowing chuckles rippled through the audience. Evelyn's vigilant HOA monitoring was well known throughout town. That said, Jack continued, his tone shifting subtly, there's a fine line between community watchfulness and invasion of privacy. Flying drones over private property without permission, for instance, is a violation of FAA regulations and potentially state privacy laws. More chuckles, louder this time. Several heads turned toward Evelyn, whose friend Barbara reached over to pat her hand consolingly. When the Q&A began, hands shot up across the room. Most questions were predictable. Concerns about teenage loitering at the convenience store, complaints about speeding on Main Street, questions about Jack's experience. He answered each with the confident ease of someone who had briefed presidents and foreign dignitaries. Carol Jenkins, the elementary school principal, raised her hand. Sheriff Thornton, we've heard rumors about your plans for the old ranch property. Would you care to share with everyone? Jack smiled. I'm glad you asked. Yes, I'm renovating my grandfather's ranch, which has been in my family for generations. Once completed, part of it will serve as a youth program for at-risk kids, using equine therapy techniques I've seen work wonders in communities across the country. A murmur of approval swept through the crowd. Even some of Evelyn's HOA allies were nodding appreciatively. I'd welcome community involvement, Jack added. In fact, I'll be hosting an open house next month for anyone interested in volunteering or just learning more. As the meeting adjourned and people began to mingle, Jack watched Evelyn gather her belongings with trembling hands. Her HOA supporters had diplomatically dispersed, leaving her isolated. Rather than letting her escape, Jack made his way through the crowd toward her. Miss Prescott, he said, extending his hand, I believe we have some unfinished business. Evelyn reluctantly took his hand, her grip limp. Sheriff Thornton, she managed, her voice barely audible. There seems to have been a misunderstanding. Several, actually, Jack agreed, his tone surprisingly gentle, including some rather creative interpretations of my renovation activities that made their way to the FBI. The success of the youth program's first summer session exceeded even Jack's expectations. 15 teenagers who might otherwise have spent their days unsupervised had instead learned responsibility through caring for horses, building confidence through riding lessons, and developing teamwork through group projects around the ranch. What surprised Jack most, however, was how instrumental Evelyn had become to the operation. Her organizational binders, color-coded, tabbed, and indexed, had transformed his rough idea into a structured program with proper insurance, liability waivers, and even corporate sponsorships she'd secured through her extensive network of connections. One Thursday afternoon, Jack found Evelyn in the newly renovated office barn, frowning at spreadsheets on her laptop. Problem? He asked, setting down a cup of coffee beside her. Cream, no sugar, exactly as she preferred. The Peterson Foundation grant requires quarterly impact assessments, she explained. I'm developing metrics to quantify behavioral improvements in the participants. Jack chuckled. 7 months ago, you were documenting my suspicious activities in that same binder. Evelyn's cheeks flushed, but she'd finally learned to laugh at herself. I've repurposed my investigative skills, she agreed, though I still maintain that your initial roofing work violated 3 different safety codes. Probably, Jack conceded. I've never claimed to be a perfect handyman. Their easy banter would have shocked anyone who'd witnessed their first confrontations. The transition hadn't been smooth. Their coffee meeting had started tense, with Evelyn defensive and Jack skeptical. But when she'd pulled out her own annotated copy of his grant proposal, with errors highlighted and improvements suggested in the margins, he'd recognized a valuable potential ally. Outside the office window, they watched as Deputy Rodriguez led a riding lesson. The teenager on horseback was Tommy Ramirez, whose father was serving time for drug distribution. 7 weeks earlier, Tommy had arrived at the ranch sullen and hostile. Now he sat tall in the saddle, patiently guiding his horse through an obstacle course. Gerald and Patricia Wilson are hosting a fundraiser next weekend, Evelyn said, consulting her ever-present planner. They've invited several potential donors. The mayor suggested we both attend to discuss the program's success. Jack raised an eyebrow. Both of us? Together? People find our partnership intriguing. Evelyn admitted. The story has spread beyond Pine Ridge. Apparently, the county commissioners are considering using our program as a model for other communities. Before Jack could respond, his phone rang. Agent Rivera checking in from Denver. Marcus, how's life at the bureau? Less entertaining since you left, Rivera laughed. How's your favorite HOA president? Jack glanced at Evelyn, who pretended not to listen while obviously straining to hear. She's actually sitting right here, helping manage our youth program. Turns out her surveillance skills transfer well to program administration. After finishing the call, Jack turned back to Evelyn. Marcus says hello. He also mentioned that your FBI file has been officially closed. A pity, Evelyn replied with unexpected humor. Being a person of interest added excitement to my retirement. As they walked toward the main house for lunch, they passed the new community garden where several Whispering Pines residents were working alongside program participants. The garden straddled the property line, technically half on HOA land and half on Jack's ranch, a physical manifestation of their unlikely alliance. You know, Jack said, when I moved back to Pine Ridge, I expected a quiet life after all those years with the Bureau. I never imagined my biggest challenge would be an HOA president with binoculars. Evelyn smiled, her former rigidity softened by months of genuine purpose. And I never imagined reporting a suspicious neighbor to the FBI would lead to the most meaningful project of my retirement. Life's funny that way, Jack agreed. As they watched Tommy Ramirez successfully complete the riding course, Evelyn consulted her planner once more. The town newsletter wants an interview next week about our unusual partnership. Should I schedule it? Jack laughed. Sure. Just leave out the part where you classified my satellite dish as a communication device for offshore operatives. It was a reasonable assumption at the time, Evelyn insisted, though her eyes twinkled. And I stand by my assessment of your initial landscaping efforts. Those were truly criminal. Jack wiped sweat from his brow and surveyed the dilapidated barn. His grandfather would have been heartbroken to see the place in such disrepair, but after sitting vacant for 7 years, it was a miracle the structure was standing at all. A flash of movement caught his eye. Another glossy pamphlet tucked beneath his front gate, no doubt containing more passive-aggressive, friendly reminders about property standards. He collected 16 of them so far, each more strongly worded than the last. This latest one featured clip art of a gavel and the words "Final Notice" in alarming red font. Jack tossed it onto his growing collection without bothering to read it. His phone buzzed. Deputy Rodriguez checking in about tomorrow's schedule. As the newest and youngest member of his small department, Rodriguez was eager to impress, unaware that Jack had specifically requested him based on his impressive academy records. Yes, Luis, 9 a.m. is fine, Jack confirmed. And no, you don't need to wear the formal uniform. Regular duty gear is fine. As he ended the call, an unfamiliar Mercedes SUV with PRESCOTT vanity plates crawled to a stop at his property line. A woman in a crisp pantsuit emerged, her highlighted blonde bob unmoved by the gentle breeze. She approached his fence like someone might approach a rabid animal, smartphone held in front of her like a shield. "Excuse me," she called. "Sir, this is private property." Jack leaned on his hammer. Yes, ma'am. My private property. The woman's smile tightened. I'm Evelyn Prescott, president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. Perhaps you didn't receive our notices. I received them, Jack said, returning to his work. Evelyn's composure faltered momentarily. Then you're aware that your activities are in violation of Section 12, Paragraph 3 of our neighborhood covenant regarding. I'm aware that my property isn't part of your neighborhood, Jack interrupted. This land was here long before Whispering Pines existed. Nevertheless, Evelyn persisted, there are community standards to maintain. Your property borders our development and impacts our aesthetic continuity. Our homes start at $850,000, and she gestured vaguely at the weathered buildings, situation is having a detrimental effect. Jack set down his hammer and walked toward the fence, noticing how Evelyn instinctively took a step back. 20 years of interviewing hardened criminals had taught him to read people, and everything about Evelyn Prescott screamed control. Miss Prescott, I appreciate your concern, but this ranch has been in my family for 3 generations. I'm restoring it, not abandoning it. Restoring to what exactly? Her gaze landed on the partial skeleton of a rusted tractor, a junkyard. Before Jack could respond, Evelyn's phone rang. She glanced at it and frowned. I need to take this. But we're not finished discussing this matter. She retreated to her vehicle, speaking in hushed but forceful tones. Jack returned to his work, mentally calculating how long it would take before his identity became public knowledge. The mayor had agreed to keep his arrival low-key until he'd settled in, but in a town of Pine Ridge's size, secrets rarely stayed secret for long. As Evelyn Prescott's Mercedes pulled away, Jack noticed her smartphone pointed out the window, documenting more violations. Numbed out, he smiled to himself, wondering what she'd think if she knew the vagrant she was harassing had once led an operation that seized the largest cocaine shipment in FBI history. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Mayor Wilson. Jack, how's the settling in going? Listen, I'm calling about the town hall next week. The council is eager to formally introduce you. Think you could wear the uniform and give a short speech? Jack watched Evelyn's car disappear down the road. Absolutely, Mr. Mayor. I think it's time I introduce myself to the community. Special Agent Rivera hung up the phone with Jack and leaned back in his chair, still chuckling. Protocol dictated he file a report on Evelyn's tip. Civilian reports couldn't simply be dismissed, no matter how absurd. He began typing, occasionally pausing to shake his head at the photos she'd sent. A knock at his door interrupted his work. Sir, the woman from Pine Ridge is on line 2 again. Says it's urgent. Rivera sighed. Put her through. He hit the speaker button. Mrs. Prescott, what can I help you with? Agent Rivera, I've made a breakthrough. Evelyn's voice trembled with excitement. The suspect is constructing underground infrastructure. I have photographic evidence of him digging trenches across the property. Ma'am, that could be for irrigation or utilities. At night, with specialized equipment. Her voice dropped to a dramatic whisper. And I've intercepted coded communications. Rivera raised an eyebrow. Intercepted communications. Mrs. Prescott, are you aware that wiretapping is a federal offense? Not wiretapping, she clarified hastily. I overheard him on his cell phone while I was walking my dog along the property line. He specifically said, the package arrives tomorrow. Everything needs to be ready. Rivera bit his lip to keep from laughing. Jack had texted him yesterday about a shipment of lumber arriving for his barn renovation. Mrs. Prescott, while we appreciate citizen vigilance, I should warn you that interfering with a potential federal investigation cooled. I would never interfere. Evelyn protested. I'm simply gathering intelligence. My late father was military intelligence during Korea, you know. Observation is in my blood. After promising to update the case file with her new information, Rivera immediately called Jack back. She's relentless, he told his former colleague. I'm starting to admire her dedication, even if it's completely misguided. Jack was in the middle of digging a trench for a water line to his barn. the very underground infrastructure Evelyn had reported. You know what's ironic? If she'd just introduced herself normally instead of immediately threatening me with HOA violations, I probably would have told her I was the new sheriff. Where's the fun in that? Rivera laughed. But seriously, Jack, you need to shut this down before she does something genuinely problematic. She mentioned intercepting communications. She's one step away from actual criminal trespassing or worse. I know, Jack sighed. The town hall is tomorrow night. I was planning to let the reveal happen naturally, but maybe I should pay her a visit beforehand. And miss the public spectacle. Don't you dare, Rivera protested. After all those years of you being the straight-laced one while I got written up for creative interpretations of protocol, I deserve to imagine her face when she realizes who you are. After hanging up, Jack noticed a drone hovering near his property. It wasn't military or police grade, more like a high-end consumer model with an impressive camera. As it dipped lower for a better view of his trenching work, Jack smiled directly at it and waved. Then, making a split-second decision that his younger, by-the-book FBI self would have disapproved of, he reached into his truck, pulled out his sheriff's badge, and held it up toward the drone's camera. The drone immediately shot upward and zipped away at maximum speed. Jack laughed, wondering if Evelyn was already frantically calling Agent Rivera with breaking news about her suspicious neighbor impersonating law enforcement. He could almost hear tomorrow's town hall meeting getting more interesting by the minute. Inside her home office, Evelyn stared in disbelief at her drone's footage, rewinding and replaying the moment when the suspect had flashed what appeared to be a law enforcement badge. "Harold," she called out. "Come look at this immediately. He's not just a criminal, he's impersonating an officer." Harold shuffled into the room reluctantly. "Maybe he actually is an officer, Evelyn." "Impossible. I've called the sheriff's department 3 times about him. They said they'd look into it. If he were legitimate law enforcement, they would have told me." Harold watched the footage again. "That looks like a real badge, dear." "Of course it looks real," Evelyn scoffed. "These criminal enterprises spare no expense on counterfeits. I need to call Agent Rivera right away. This changes everything." The Whispering Pines Wednesday Book Club had long abandoned any pretense of discussing literature. Instead, it had evolved into what residents privately called the grievance hour, with Evelyn holding court from her prize Queen Anne chair. "Ladies, this situation has reached a critical point," Evelyn announced, distributing color-coded folders to each member. "I've prepared comprehensive dossiers on the ranch activities for each of you." Susan Miller cautiously opened her folder. "Evelyn, these are just pictures of a man fixing up his property." "Look closer at Exhibit C," Evelyn insisted, pointing dramatically at a grainy photo. "That's clearly a satellite communication device." "It's a weather vane," Barbara Henderson muttered, squinting at the image. At 72, she was the only member who consistently challenged Evelyn, protected by the impunity of age and the fact that she'd taught Evelyn in 3rd grade. "My family's farm had one just like it." Evelyn's lips tightened. "Barbara, with all due respect, this is the 21st century. Weather information comes from apps now, not medieval technology." As the meeting disbanded, Barbara lingered behind. "You know, Evelyn, I remember when you first moved here. You were so excited about building community." "I am building community," Evelyn insisted, "by protecting our standards." Barbara patted her hand. "There's a difference between standards and control, dear. I know because I watched Henry, my late husband, struggle with the same thing." Evelyn bristled. "This isn't about control. It's about security." "Yesterday, I observed the suspect unloading long, suspicious containers from his truck." "Suspicious containers?" "Metallic tubes, approximately 6 feet long." Barbara laughed. "Fence posts, Evelyn. The man is rebuilding his fence." But Evelyn was beyond reason. That night, she added another page to her investigation file, which now occupied an entire drawer of her filing cabinet. She'd even created a timeline on her home office wall, connecting photos and notes with red yarn in a pattern that would have impressed conspiracy theorists worldwide. Her husband, Harold, paused in the doorway. "Honey, don't you think this is getting a bit excessive?" Evelyn didn't look up from her laptop. where she was researching signs of illegal drug manufacturing. That's exactly what everyone said about the Daniels unapproved garden shed, until I proved it exceeded the permitted dimensions by 8 inches, she replied. If I hadn't persisted, we would have descended into anarchy. Harold sighed. It's just, maybe the man wants privacy. Not everyone enjoys living under a microscope. Privacy is suspicious, Evelyn declared. Innocent people have nothing to hide. The next morning, Jack was surprised to find his mail slot jammed with anonymous notes from neighbors. Unlike Evelyn's official violation notices, these were friendly warnings. She reported the Garcias for wind chimes last year, got them fined $200, documented my lawn infractions with time-stamped photos for 6 weeks straight, had my children's treehouse condemned after measuring it at 0.5 feet over regulation height. Jack chuckled, tucking the notes into his pocket. In his FBI days, he'd handled hostage negotiations, undercover operations in cartel territory, and terrorist threats. Somehow, the prospect of navigating small-town politics with Evelyn Prescott seemed equally challenging. Later that afternoon, Jack's former FBI colleague, Mike, arrived with his family for the weekend. As they unloaded camping gear from their government-issued SUV, Jack noticed a flash of reflected light from the pristine White House closest to his property line. Mike, Jack said quietly, I think we're under surveillance. Mike laughed. Old habits die hard, huh? Still seeing threats everywhere. Jack grinned. Not threats. Just an extremely dedicated HOA president with binoculars. He waved directly at Evelyn's window. Let's give her something to really write up. Mike's eyes lit with mischief. Operation Neighborhood Watch? Exactly, Jack nodded. Follow my lead. Evelyn glanced around frantically, clearly hoping for an escape route. Finding none, she squared her shoulders with remarkable resilience. I was acting in the best interest of my community. If I overstepped, it was out of concern for security. Jack nodded. Commitment to community safety is something I respect, even when it's misguided. Mayor Wilson approached, sensing tension. Everything okay here? Perfect timing, Mayor, Jack said. I was just inviting Ms. Prescott for coffee tomorrow to discuss community outreach opportunities. Her organizational skills are legendary, I hear. Wilson seemed surprised but pleased. Evelyn's the most organized person in Pine Ridge. She ran our fundraising auction for years before focusing on the HOA. Jack raised an eyebrow at this new information. Is that so? Then I'd especially value her input on grant applications for the youth program. Evelyn, caught between humiliation and unexpected professional recognition, finally found her voice. I would be willing to review your documentation. Excellent, Jack replied, handing her his card. Sunshine Cafe, 10 a.m. I'll bring the program outline and those surveillance photos you dropped. Impressive work, by the way. The FBI could use your dedication to detail. As Evelyn hurried away, Barbara Henderson sidled up to Jack. That was either very kind or very cruel of you, Sheriff Thornton. Jack watched Evelyn's retreating figure. Neither, ma'am. Just strategic. Sometimes the most effective way to neutralize an opponent is to turn them into an ally. Barbara chuckled. My late husband was military. He would have approved of your tactics. She leaned closer. But fair warning, Evelyn doesn't surrender easily, and she never forgets a humiliation. I'm counting on both those qualities, Jack replied with a smile that suggested the former FBI agent knew exactly what he was doing.